When I was little, we found a man. He looked like butchered. The old women in the village crossed themselves and whispered crazy things, strange things. El diablo cazador de hombres. Only in the hottest years this happens. And this year it grows hot. We begin finding our man. We found them sometimes without their skin, and sometimes much, much worse. El que hace trofeos de los hombres means the demon who makes trophies of man.
Fantasy eliminations are sometimes examples for the rest of the league. As you're moving about the fantasy season in the best way that you know how, when you walk around the jungle, you begin to look up and you look at some of these hanging corpses that we accumulate as the weeks go on. Ed and Hensel are dead. They've been killed. They've been eliminated. But in fantasy, you don't vanish. You don't just evaporate into thin air. We can look and see the examples of why you ended up the way that you ended up. Are they through some habits that you have, or you just made simple mistakes? And of course, there is the possibility of fate just not being on your side for this particular year. Injuries was a huge part of one of these seasons for Ed. His injury to Odell Beckham Jr. cut him short, not because Odell Beckham Jr. was producing so much, but because at the very least he had a name. He had a name that Ed could dish out if he just so wanted to make some trade adjustments. His other injury was Michael Thomas. Now, Michael Thomas is an injury that I think hurt him a great deal because Michael Thomas would have produced if he was on the field. There's a very big difference between having Drew Brees as your quarterback and Baker Mayfield, who's basically just Johnny Manziel, just the evolved form of a Johnny Manziel. That was an injury that hurt Ed because he was gone for several weeks, and you figure that Michael Thomas would have gotten something. I believe this week against me, he might have put up at least like 10 points or something like that. You see, but even though injuries were a detriment to Ed's season, that's okay because some people thrive even with injuries, and some people in this particular season are thriving with those challenges. But when you combine injuries with no action, then they hang you up on a fucking tree. Then the predator uses you as a trophy. Then the predator uses you as an example to show off and to show the rest of us if we continue to make these mistakes, we're going to be dangling up on that fucking tree. When you do nothing about the fact that you have injuries, then you're just asking for it. I don't know how many weeks ago Odell Beckham Jr. was, I even forgot as I was setting up for this recap, I even forgot that Ed had Odell Beckham Jr. I didn't see him on the squad, and then I thought, did Ed make a trade? And I just didn't realize it. And then, I look at the player pool, and he's all the way at the bottom. He has an Achilles injury, and he's been out for several weeks. You just forget stuff. Obviously, the injury that he had to Joe Burrow, and of course that hurts Ed because he's protecting himself by having all these quarterbacks on his team. The final statement that I'll say about Ed and his 3 quarterback decision, which has given him practical results of what a failure it is, though I don't necessarily think it's because he had it on the team, it doesn't help. Why? Because a big problem of Ed's team is that when you look at it, he doesn't really have a bench. He didn't have a bench. If you have 2 quarterbacks in there, he's got an extra defense, and you know, and some wide receivers that he may shift around every now and then. There's no running back support. Adrian Peterson was on his bench. It's already been determined about 2 to 3 weeks ago that Adrian Peterson is not the back in Detroit. He's just not that guy. I think Swift was injured last week, and Adrian Peterson, he did nothing. So Ed and his 2-3 quarterback system is, as I said before, it's trying not to lose instead of trying to win. Because maybe it's a protection against the coronavirus. If Kyler Murray were to get injured, well, then I think I'm being smart because I've got Deshaun Watson on the bench. It's not, as the weeks continue to go along and Kyler Murphy's perfectly healthy and he's the number one quarterback in fantasy. So just think about that for a second. I just want you guys to wrap your heads around this for a second. I want you guys to wrap your heads around the best case scenario worked out for Ed. This was not a situation where he had 3 quarterbacks and he couldn't really figure it out, and he had his best quarterback was like a 10th ranked quarterback. No, he had the number 1 ranked quarterback in the league in Kyler Murray and still chose to keep these men on the team. So since Ed doesn't communicate with the league, I can only assume that this was all just a defensive play. This was all just, I don't want people to, I don't want to get a message that somebody's got the coronavirus and I want to keep them there on the bench. You're just trying not to lose. And what happens? You lose. That's what happens. What was that classic line from Rounders? You don't lose what you don't put in the middle. But you don't win much either. You don't win much when you don't take any chances. And in this league, taking chances is picking your quarterback and going with that fucking quarterback and stocking up your team with options in the event of injuries. See, there wasn't any proper backups for an Odell Beckham Jr., was it? No. It was, it was a team that was depending on a Hydra to explode every week, which that's what a Hydra does. That's the power of the Hydra. And, in some cases, it could be quite successful for you. I think in week 7, that was Ed's last victory. He exploded on Orlando. Not sure. I have so many papers later on. He exploded on Orlando 105-276. That was a game in which Kyler Murray scored 36 and DeAndre Hopkins scored 14 points. So his Hydra outdid Orlando's Hydra, but that's really what it depends on. Hensel was a team that suffered from, of course, poor drafting and injuries as well, but not to the degree of Ed's team. Of course, Hensel had that draft blunder where he selected Chris Carson with his very first pick. But during the first few weeks of the season, Chris Carson was producing. This is why I said I think it was a better decision for Hensel's running backs than Andy's running backs. Chris Carson got an 18 week 1, 16, then a 17, then a 7, then a 22, then a 13, then the team went on a bye, and week 7, it seems like he had an injury. He had only racked up 3 points, and he hasn't played since week 7. That has hurt Hensel because Hensel's team isn't very strong outside of it. He has his own little makeshift Hydra, which, it's kind of like a paper tiger. It's not an actual weapon. It's not an actual creature. Matt Ryan, and in this particular week, Matt Ryan all over Hensel's team by only accumulating 5 points. Calvin Ridley, I'm not sure why I called him Calvin Ridley. The first few weeks of the season, Calvin Ridley was phenomenal. He scored 6 touchdowns and 97 points. Week 4, he didn't play. I'm not quite sure. Maybe he was injured. But during weeks 8 and 9, you can't really rest this on Stevan Ridley's shoulders, but a team that's going to sort of play off of the Hydra energy sometime really, they really need one of the two individuals to step up. Week 8, he lost to Joe by 12 points. Stephen Ridley scored 4. Week 9, he lost to La Bamba by 6 points. Stephen Ridley didn't play. Calvin Ridley. Why do I continue to call him? Who's Stephen Ridley? I'm not even sure who the fuck Stephen Ridley is. Calvin Ridley didn't play week 9. So you can't necessarily blame it on him, but if the team is going to rest on a Hydra and have no other wide receivers whatsoever, I mean, Hensel did have what is Deontay Johnson, that wide receiver from the Pittsburgh Steelers. He does have him, he's kind of, showing some signs of life, but there's nothing there as far as wide receivers go. And, what are you going to do? That's pretty much the same old story for Hensel. Next year, I guess, draft better. Hensel's last championship, of course, was in 2009, and Ed's last championship was in 2015. These last 3 years have been a complete and utter disaster for Hensel. 2019, he finished 10th overall with a record of 4-9. 2018, he finished 5th with a record of 7-6. And 2017, he finished 10th once again with a record of 4-9. Ed last year finished 4th with a record of 9-4. The year before that, he finished 9th with a record of 5-18. And in 2017, he finished 3rd with a record of 7-6. So these two gentlemen are no more. They are dead. We can look at them as examples of what not to do. And in some cases, we can look at them, as examples as what to do, which is, kind of the same thing. Don't ever, I want you to just fucking just ram this thought into your brain. Don't ever play another season of fantasy and have injuries and not make trades. Joe did that. And Joe is still in playoff contention. So what does that tell you about what Joe's team could have been if Joe would have made some moves? We're not talking Alvin Kamara, just given to you with a big fancy red bow. That's how Eric got Alvin Kamara. Since Pedro's selling cars, he wrapped Alvin Kamara in one of those huge bows that you see in like those Chrysler commercials, and then he just left them just like right in front of his fucking doorstep. You won't get trades like that, not necessarily if you're Joe, but you might have the ability to get something out of the players that you already do have, and Joe's team wasn't that terrible. But nonetheless, Hensel and Ed are eliminated from playoff contention. Gentlemen, there's always next year. Go fuck yourselves. On this festive day, this is your Week 11 recap. Bundy here, you there. This recap is, it took me a while to get this recap together because, to be honest with you, there is a lot going on with the remaining teams in this league. There's a lot going on because, of course, you have teams that are playoff teams, but they haven't clinched yet. You have teams that have very difficult roads. You have teams that I've even put in a mental box that they are fucking dead already. And that's a team that's outside of Hensel and Ed. I'll get to that team in a second. But first, let's talk about ties. The last tie that we had in this fantasy league was last year, week 10, when Rollo Tomassi and the then Dad Bod tied up at 99-99. This, of course, was after they had made their own interesting trade where Paul wrapped up Drew Brees in a nice little red bow. Drew Brees scored 11 points, and Aaron Jones scored 27 points for Jay. On Paul's side, he got 32 points from Lamar Jackson, 20 points from Amari Cooper, a -2 from his Giants defense, and 15 points from his kicker, Harrison Butker. Harrison Butker is a name that comes to mind with the tie that we had this week between Eric and Andy. And this is really the only reason to mention Eric at this point. It's just to talk about this stupid fucking tie. So 92-92. And of course you have to give some credit to Andy because through this Taysom Hill loophole, he was able to basically have two quarterbacks. Andy basically had two heads this fantasy week, and Taysom was able to score 24 points. 24 points. When I saw him on Andy's roster, I'm sure like any other player in any other league, you said, this shit is not fucking fair. You can't just let somebody get away with this. We can't create this loophole that, yeah, sure, it's a loophole through how the offense uses that particular quarterback, but it's just, fantasy chance can't be that damning. It can't be like there is this amazing, this Game Shark-like edge, and only one team has it, and they're going to have it for the rest of the season. I looked at Taysom on his bench, and I was like, holy shit, what the fuck is happening? Thankfully, ESPN... the people at ESPN, cooler heads prevailed over there. I don't know how they came to this conclusion, but of course, as I think Jay said earlier this week, Taysom Hill will no longer be considered a tight end / quarterback. He's just a quarterback from week 12 and on, and thank God for that. Andy also got 5 points from his pathetic running back Miles Sanders, and 11 from his tag team partner Josh Jacobs, who, as I told Andy, is a store brand elite running back. He is not an elite running back within fantasy. In real fucking football, sure, he's a fucking superstar, but no one gives a shit about Josh Jacobs. You're a fucking idiot. Eric got 16 points from his Saints defense and a -1 from Matt Prater. Of course, we mentioned Harrison Butker, and there's the connection there with Paul getting 15 points from Harrison Butker last year, and Eric benching Harrison Butker, who racked up 5 points, and that of course would have given Eric the edge had he just kept his kicker in the game. I mentioned Ed and his not trying to lose is a bad tactic. Eric switching around his kicker is being overtly ambitious. It's trying to manufacture victories. I personally don't touch two positions. You already know I do not touch the quarterback position. It is not to be touched. You go with your quarterback. You just go with your fucking quarterback. The second position that I do not touch is kicker. I have Justin Tucker, who hasn't been amazing this year, but I'm very confident in the fact that at the very least, Tucker is going to get opportunities. He's gonna get enough field goal tries to give me a lot of production. So I don't sit around and judge his scores and look at who my opponent is. And also, it's a sign of intimidation. Don't forget, this is a sign that Eric was intimidated by Andy. Intimidated, any way you want to look at it, or I was trying to beat him, whatever you want to say. When you start shifting around stuff like that, it's because you are really trying to get this person the fuck out of here. To me, that shit just reads off as like, I have to beat this guy because, I don't know, I have to do it for my team's morale or something like that. Don't give me any of this shit about this is fantasy and you try to win every game. You're in the playoffs already. You won your division. I don't want to hear that shit we said like 5-6 years ago when it was like every week was supposed to feel like it was like the fantasy playoffs and you had to try to win at all costs. you can spare some losses here. And if you somehow let Andy's trash talk affect you, Andy's been an inconvenience, a surface nuisance to this fantasy league for over 10 years, and he finally shows some glimmer of hope. He finally fucking grows up and does what many of us have done before. And now you're intimidated by Andy and his fucking trash talk. You don't listen to Andy. That's what comes along with being the best team in this particular season, which I think Eric is, though Paul isn't too far behind. And, you can make the argument that Paul's team is better than Eric's. But one of the parts of being the best team is you're not fucking fazed by anybody. Andy wasn't fazed by anybody last year. He just said, fuck you. I don't believe he tried to manufacture wins. I mean, he probably did. But Eric tried to manufacture a victory, and this is normally what happens when you try to do that. I spoke earlier this year when Orlando had made little snide comments about, me picking up a kicker or emphasizing that kickers are important or whatever. And I said, you should try to own dynamic offenses. If you want to own the quarterback, own the kicker, because, they work one and the same. They work as the same unit. The Ravens haven't been the greatest. They haven't been the greatest offensive team this year. Lamar Jackson is a little bit all over the place. He's part of the reason why I've had so many struggles and so many difficulties, because he's just not the player that he was last year. I guess he got the Madden curse, and I fell for it. I fell for the hype. But I would never bench Justin Tucker. I just either have him on my team or I just don't. And I think there's a very big difference in that. There's a very big difference in benching somebody and taking somebody off your team, because you're saying that they have some form of value because you've kept them on your bench. You're already looking too much into a kicker. When we have to then look at the degrees of how you feel about the kicker, we're spending too much time thinking about kickers, because you putting him on the bench is like, oh, he's not good for this week, but he's still valuable. He's still good. I'll still keep him around. No, I say just take him off completely. If you don't trust him anymore, just dump him out. Dump him out and stay with Matt Prater. The question remains, if Eric would have gotten 20 points from Matt Prater, would this then cause Eric to play Matt Prater next week because he thinks he's going to duplicate that again, and then he benches Harrison Butker? You conflict yourself way too much. You put too much shit into your fucking head. I don't even know. Did Eric get this guy off his team? Because I would. Just off general principle, I would get Matt Prater off of my team. Let's see. Yes, Matt Prater is no longer on the Ewok rape squad. So I guess you try to cleanse yourself of the stupid mistakes. But yes, these two gentlemen had a tie. If you want another piece of history on ties, before the tie in 2019, we didn't have a tie in 2018 or 2017. The last one before last year was week 13 of 2016, and this was kind of interesting. It was also with Andy, and this time it was Hensel. They tied at 172 points. But what makes it interesting is that Andy got the bye, he got the division, and then they faced each other again 2 weeks later in round 2 of the playoffs, and Andy defeated Hensel 108-281. And then in round 3, Andy got his ass whooped by Paul 132-99. So, hey, 99. Hey, it all comes full circle again, huh? I just wanted to shit on Andy towards the end of that segment because, it's always necessary to shit on Andy. So, I'm kind of losing my voice here. So, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about 3 games. No one gives a shit about Hensel versus Ed. They are dead. Their carcasses are hanging in the woods. They're bloodied up. They're fucking dead. And can I ask you a question? I kind of thought of this. You guys, you noticed that I played that Predator audio at the beginning of the podcast. Why is it that in the very first scene where you saw that girl, Eric remembers he used to always laugh at that scene in the Predator when when Arnold puts a flashlight on her and he's like, look at her, she's scared out of her mind, and the guy's trying to like translate with her like, ¿Qué pasa, mujer? And she was like, yo no sé, la selva se lo llevó. Why all of a sudden in that clip, which is, it gives you chills because it sets the stage for the imminent death that's out there, and Arnold is the guy that's gonna fucking answer that call. And of course it's always great how they kind of just like zoom into Arnold's face, but all of a sudden she gives like this earth-shattering, like, ominous speech about, the myth of the fucking, el diablo cazador de hombres and shit. Like, all of a sudden she can speak English very well. I didn't really understand how they made that work, but, whatever. I digress. So, no one gives a shit about Eric versus Hensel. About Hensel versus Ed. No one cares. They've been eliminated. Who cares? And no one also gives a shit about Eric versus Joe. Because, I said it. I said it earlier. I said somebody's already dead. We're walking around that jungle. We're walking around that jungle. You know who Joe is? I don't know who the fuck it was in the movie. I'm pretty sure at some point it was, I don't know, somebody who just takes a fucking gunshot. Joe's the guy with that's the guy with the glasses, the guy who's a translator. He was Latino, he was Spanish. That guy, doesn't he get hit with like a tree or something, and they kind of like drag him around? We're dragging Joe around now. I have 1 foot out of the playoffs myself. Maybe I got dinged up a little bit. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I got shot in the leg, or I don't know. Something happened to me, but I have some sort of injury. But I can still take care of myself. Joe's almost dead. He's almost bleeding out. He's looking up at fucking Ed. He's looking up at fucking Hensel, and he's like, man, that's fucking crazy, man. They're fucking dead. And we're all looking at him like, yeah. We're looking at him like, yeah, you're fucking next, Joe. You're fucking next. Do you know why? Because Eric's gonna fucking kill you this week, Joe. He's just gonna fucking mangle you. Eric's just gonna fucking grab you. He's just gonna mangle you. It's gonna be like one of those disgusting world star fights that you see where somebody just gets so disrespected. Like, a guy just gets punched in the face, and then the guy kicks him in the face, and then he spits in his face. Have any of you guys ever seen the Nipsey Hussle video where he got killed? That's a video that I don't really want to see again. I saw like once or twice, but the guy shoots him and then the guy kicks him in the head. Like just the most vile shit. This is what's going to happen this week. It's going to be very disrespectful. Those of you who remember earlier this season, Eric beat the living daylight out of Joe. What week was that? Let's see. My God, what was that? Week 4, Eric defeated Joe 148-46. That was one of the greatest. I believe the 148 is the highest point total of the season. Hell, the 46 points might even be the low. That was just one of the greatest beatings of the season, and in fact, that was the first win of Eric's now. What ended up being, a 7-game winning streak. I guess 7.5 if you count the tie. But that was the beginning of Eric's run. What I'm about to discuss is wish fulfillment for me. Because in my head, I'm getting rid of Joe. In my head, taking Joe out of the equation, which I believe he's out of the equation because I do not think that there's any chance that Joe wins this week. I do not think that there's any chance that Joe wins this week. Joe loses. Joe is eliminated from playoff contention. Of course, Joe and I are in the very same pool because we have the same amount of wins. We have 4 wins. There'll be 1 game left. You don't cut it in this league with 5 wins. 6 is always the minimum. There you go. So before I get into anything, I just want to say that if Joe and I lose, then Orlando, Andy, La Bamba, and Charles Lee J, you guys are all in. If Joe and I lose, this whole thing is over. There's no suspense to any of this, and we just await the very first week of the fantasy playoffs. So now that I've declared that no one gives a shit about the 2 corpses playing each other, and we don't give a shit about about Eric and the snuff film that he's about to film with Joe, let's get to Andy versus Paul. Andy versus Paul is, of course, it's a game between, two decent teams. This is a game that I think Andy will lose, and I'll tell you quite simply why I think Andy will lose this game. Andy has Russell Wilson going up against the Phillies, the Philadelphia Eagles on Monday night. Andy, of course, has Sanders. So it always kind of works out in this way where that can work out. It can be the case that Russell Wilson can do his numbers and Sanders can still be present long enough in the game where he could maybe get a red zone and some yardage. But number one, do you have any confidence that the Eagles can move it down the field enough to the point where Sanders would even get those minuscule opportunities for scores? That's why it helps to be a running back that's not really great on a great offense, like Edward Helaire, who I noticed that Jay didn't play this week. I don't know if he's taken him out in other weeks, but I kind of get the point. But you got to figure that he's always going to get those opportunities. It kind of works in the same way that kickers do. It's like he's going to get a seat at the table almost every drive. He's always going to get a shot. And that's not the case with somebody like Sanders. He has to create his opportunities. And that could be quite difficult if Russell Wilson, just fucking throws 2 or 3 bombs, and ends this thing quite quickly and takes the running game out of it. Justin Herbert has been producing at quite a fucking high rate. This freckled face asshole, since week 7, it's 37 points, 21, 23, 20, 27. Anything that Russell Wilson can do, Justin Herbert can do better or just as good. So he can meet Andy at that point total. And you're already dealing with 2 players, being managed by the same clock, and one could affect the other one. And as I said, obviously with Sanders and with Wilson. And on top of that, Paul has BJ Metcalf. BJ Metcalf is that dude's made in the same factory that fucking that Dalvin Cook's made in. The same factory as that other fucking asshole who plays for the Titans. These guys, they're metahumans. They're not real people. He has BJ Metcalf. He's going to offset some points, and Paul's team is just overall just better. So I believe that Andy will drop from a record of 6-4-1 to 6-5-1. Yes, of course, Andy having that tie, basically gives Andy 6.5 wins. So that puts him at the front of the playoff line minus the 2 division winners, and that would make Andy the 3rd ranked team in the playoffs with a record of 7-5-1 because he faces who is Andy's? The reason why I'm saying that Andy will make the playoffs is because even though he won't win this week, the final game of the season for Andy is up against Joe. It's up against Joe. Andy's team is already, since he has 6.5 wins, he's already in the position where next week, through other losses, even if he loses to Joe, he can still make the playoffs. So Andy's just at an advantage. Get over it. Andy is in the playoffs, but in my opinion, he will not clinch a playoff spot this week. He will lose to Paul. And Paul will go off, for double-digit wins this year. The next game that I want to talk about is the huge, big McLarge huge game between La Bamba and Charles Lee J. Ray. I don't have an opinion on who will win this game, but I can tell you who I desperately need to win and who I desperately need to lose. It does me no good for Pedro to lose this week. It does me no good for Pedro to lose this week. Now, why is that? Pedro has a record of 6-5, and of course, Charles Lee J. Ray has a record of 6-5. Points play a very big factor into all of this. Now, excluding Andy, Orlando is at top of the scoring list with 1,057 points. Second is Jay with 943. Bundy with Team Bundy with 939, and Dro is last with 932. So Orlando has a 114-point lead over Jay, who is second in this whole little bubble team scenario. 114 points, right? But points are important. Pedro and Jay have the same amount of points. And, I basically, there's only like 4 or 5 points separating all of us. Of course, I've had the injury to CMC. That has a lot to do with it. But, that's besides the point. Pedro gift wrapping Alvin Kamara has something to do with that, too. I think Pedro would have a few more points if he still had him. But they're both in the same pool in that sense. The reason why I need Pedro to win is because Pedro has a easier road after this week. Pedro, in his next week, will face Ed. Jay will face Paul. If Jay loses, he goes to a record of 6-6. Pedro wins, he will be 7-5. He clinches a playoff spot. And then I have the opportunity of Paul defeating Jay next week. There's no hope in me needing Ed to beat Dro if Dro loses this week. So in other words, what I'm saying, if I prefer any of these guys to leak out, I want Jay to leak out. I need Jay to fucking lose this game. Because that's the only way I'm going to confidently go into next week, assuming, of course, I defeat Orlando. All of this means nothing. All of this means nothing if I lose. But, what's the fun in just saying, I'm going to lose? That's not a very enjoyable recap. So if I beat Orlando and keep myself alive with a record of 5-7, there's very, very bleak chances there, I at least have more confidence that the person who loses will then lose again. If Dro loses to fucking Jay and I win, I still kind of go into the last week of the season facing Eric, kind of like, I don't fucking have a chance. I don't have a fucking chance. Ed could beat Dro, but, no. Plus, Pedro always has a fucking history of like, even Pedro does kind of the Andy thing where, like, even in scenarios where you could benefit off of him, being victorious, then he drops the ball. But when he wants to weasel by with a little cheap Monday night victory, he fucking gets away with it all the time. It's fucking ridiculous. So I'll say that even though advantage push, I can't give either of these guys, they're basically the same team. Their teams ain't shit. I'd love to face either of them in the very first round, even though that won't be the case, and I'll get to that. But advantage push, and I would love it if fucking Dro won this game. Again, Dro loses. I don't think there's a high chance that Dro loses to Ed or could lose to Ed. There's more of a chance of Jay losing to Paul. So if Jay could start bleeding out starting this week, that would be fucking amazing. So the last game that I'm going to discuss is obviously Team Bundy against the White Ranger. The White Ranger has a record of 5-6. If the White Ranger wins, of course, he does not clinch a playoff spot if he wins, because he would go to 6 victories. I could see myself winning this game, and I'll tell you why. One of the benefits of playing a Hydra is that it always gives you a puncher's chance. You guys are all familiar with that phrase in boxing, a puncher's chance. You always gotta give somebody a chance that they'll, especially in heavyweight fights, that they'll connect and the fight will be over, and no matter what the skill set is or what the matchup is, there's still a chance. A Hydra, A Hydra is always vulnerable, even in its infinite power, even in all of its potential of what it can do. It's a lot like Krang, that character from the Ninja Turtles who has the fucking stupid brain in his stomach. It's like once you compromise the stupid mushy brain, the robot just kind of falls apart because they can't work without each other. They have the symbiotic relate. That's what it is. It's sort of like the symbiotic relationship that Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill have. If they don't show up, then you can easily beat somebody, with an effective Hydra. Look at what happened in Week 7, as I said, with Ed versus Orlando. I think Patrick Mahomes got like an 11 or some shit like that, So obviously, as Patrick Mahomes goes, then Tyreek Hill follows. I'm not sitting here just depending on that. Of course, I have Lamar Jackson. If Lamar Jackson fucking shows up, then I don't have to worry about anybody's Hydra not working. Adam Thielen, of course, is considered out right now. I do not like the news of, it's like COVID protocol, and take him out of the game. I'm perfectly fine with that. This isn't any fucking like honorable shit where it's like, I want Orlando at his best. Nope. Fuck that. I've taken too many L's off of unfortunate situations to have any sort of fucking pity for any of you. May Adam Thielen fucking die minutes before he's about to suit it up. I'd take even more satisfaction in him thinking that he's about to play, and then all of a sudden he just loses all his sense of taste and smell, and then his fucking lungs just collapse, and then he looks up in the sky and he goes, Orlando, and he just fucking dies. That's what I want to happen this Sunday. I want him to suit up and die, and I want you to watch it live on Red Zone, Orlando. If he doesn't play, I think I have an even greater chance. Of course, I could assume that Orlando could insert Antonio Brown, who's been getting catches but hasn't been scoring any touchdowns. Waller, his tight end, who's pretty consistent. I like my chances for this week because Orlando's team seems to be a bit crippled. Todd Gurley is questionable, but he'll probably play. So, look, all this really has to do with Joe and Jay dying. That's what this is. Of course, every fantasy year, 4 have to die and 6 move on. We already have Ed and Hensel, and now I'm just saying, Joe and Jay, help me out here. Help me out. Don't try to be a hero this week, Joe. I can feel Joe trying to be a fucking hero. Joe trying to keep his fantasy check. You don't deserve it, Joe. You don't deserve it. I would love a scenario in which you were the team because, of course, you don't have a championship. I'd love it because you win your first, and everybody gets delayed from their hopes of shutting Bundy the fuck up someday. I would love it if that were you, but I would say that you don't fucking deserve it because, as I said, you haven't done anything. You've just fucking sat there and watched your team just coast. And your team definitely be a better team than mine, at least on paper, and you having a chance of improving it, and you did nothing. You don't deserve to fucking win. You don't deserve to fucking win. So don't you try to play hero this week, Joe. Don't you try to play hero this week. And hopefully, if the Eagles don't try to play heroes this week either, I'll have a lot of success because I am and I will fucking throw out the Seattle Seahawks defense against those Philadelphia Eagles on Monday night. And I know that's a bit of a risk because it's a risk because I think Seattle gave up like 44 points to someone a couple weeks ago. With defenses, I think, you tour with certain teams. I've noticed a few of you have kind of been touring with the Jets. So whoever plays against the Jets, you're playing them. I've been touring with the Eagles last week. Of course, this particular week when I beat Ed, I got 20. Sorry, because I'm not looking at this. I'm not structuring this in the same way in the sense that I'm looking at the past week's scores and shit. I just got a bunch of papers in front of me and whatever. Yeah, I think I scored about 20 points or something like that. But I've been touring with certain teams, and look, it's me. It's me at Philadelphia or whatever, and I'm here. And I think I've got a pretty good shot to win. Of course, if if Joe and Jay go fuck themselves. So my prediction is this. My prediction is that the number 1 ranked team will be Paul. He will have his bye. And since the 4 and the 5 slot are, bracketed along with the number 1 slot, Orlando coming in as the 4th team, and Dro coming in as the 5th team. They face each other in the very first round. And on the other wing, we have Eric as the 2nd ranked team, because Eric will indeed take the division this week or the next. You have Team Bundy. You have Andy ranked 3rd and Team Bundy ranked 6th, meeting each other round 1. Again, wish fulfillment. Do I necessarily feel that at this point of the season I belong there? No. Most likely Joe belongs there because he's probably a step ahead of me, but he's going to lose, so why not me? Why not me? Why Jay? Jay had his opportunity to fucking win his 3rd championship last year. You know what he did? He lost to Andy. So if he's going to waste his championship opportunities, why the fuck does he deserve to make it to the playoffs? How? These are the ramblings of an angry fantasy owner. So I don't really think I have anything here for you other than that. If any of you want to talk, playoff scenarios, if you want to play around with the numbers, feel free to do that. I am terrible at fucking mathematics and variables and all that shit, and that shit will just break my head in 3 different pieces to figure out what the stipulations would be if certain things happen next week. It's going to become more clear by next week, but as the games were moved, as the Baltimore game was moved from today to Sunday, I at least had a little bit of relief, because I basically thought, you know what? I am going to know where I stand by midday Thanksgiving. But now I guess there's going to be a delay to it, and I think I find more comfort in that. I don't want to see everything unfold in front of my eyes in one day. I want to see everything play out on Sunday and then on Monday. You know what I'm saying? Don't try to be heroes, guys. Don't fucking try it. Don't you fucking try it. Happy Thanksgiving to those of you who celebrate Thanksgiving, who live in America. I, of course, celebrated Thanksgiving here in Canada sometime in October. I don't know what the fuck they do. I think they eat turkey or they do something. I don't know. Maybe they're just resentful of the U.S. I don't know why they chose it to be in October. I have no clue. But, as always, may your quarterbacks get hurt before they leave the locker room. May your running backs pull their hamstrings. And may your wide receivers get arrested for marijuana possession. Rest in peace, Hensel. Rest in peace, Ed.